Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this second session when we're looking at blockchain and identity. My name is Rob Lawrence from Innovate Identity in the UK, and I'd like to introduce to you the CEO and founder of ShoCard, Armin Ebrahimi, and his colleague Ali Nazem, who will be giving this presentation.
Thank you. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you, and it's been a great conference so far, just looking at different aspects of identity. What we want to talk to you guys about is a little bit of what we've seen with identity, some of the work that we've done with it, and kind of the direction where we kind of see the identity moving in the future over the next 3 to 4 years. And to start with, let me just talk about what we see in terms of the vision of tomorrow. And this has nothing to do with any particular implementation or even our own implementation, but where we see the industry going over time. And I think in the past, the enterprises were driving what consumers did to a great degree. We've been hearing those themes over and over during the conference, but we think that consumers will end up driving a lot of that. And ultimately, we think that more and more so people will expect to be able to access all the things that matter to them, and they just want to simply do it by proving who they are. They want that process to be very simple. They don't want to spend a whole lot of time in that whole process. We spend a lot of time doing that today. They expect that to be very fast, and they want it to be simple and something that's obvious to them that they get and they understand. And the other thing is that we're seeing a lot more users wanting to do things that really crosses over their digital and their physical world, more so than ever before. And I think a lot of that is because of mobile devices that has really given them the ability to do that. What we're doing at ShoCard is creating a single digital identity, ultimately a federated ID, that enables all of that. But there are two other components. And again, we've heard about different aspects of that here during the conference. But one is security, and the other one is user privacy. Security is becoming more and more important because more and more assets are going online or being accessible through a digital means. So security is important both for the enterprises as well as for individuals. Your bank matters to you a lot more so than it did before, but it also matters to bank because of fraud that could take place in the liability that they have. User privacy is another aspect because we constantly have to give away so much about ourselves. One, information about ourselves that has nothing to do with the service that we're using, and that's something that is of importance to users. But the other fact is we don't want things to get hacked and have other people use our information. If you think about the way that the world is today, we have these different driver's licenses, passports, social security cards, employment cards, and a whole bunch of separate username passwords. And if you think about it, all of those are ultimately an abstract of who we are, and they're spread all over the place. And there's different pieces of our identity that actually exists in different forms, in different databases that different people have access to. But what that does is it leaves a footprint of who we are all over the place. One of the examples that I always talk about, and it's true to date, and in fact, my colleague Ali, we're just having trouble with his username password on one of his email accounts. And it's this whole process of being able to go out and improve yourself. And we have offered information over the years. That information exists out there as part of our footprint. My favorite color and the make of my first car are part of my identity. I had no idea 15 years ago when I would go to random merchants to buy something. They would force me to get a username password, and they ask me recovery questions, and I give them my favorite color. So if you know my favorite color, you may be able to get into various accounts, and I don't know where those are. And the thing is, it's not so much that they would do something wrong with it or someone's going to go to that old merchant of 15 years ago. But if that data is breached, then people will be able to actually access my account on Amazon, Citibank, wherever else I actually have my accounts at. And a lot of that goes back into the fact that I've left my footprint all over the place. So, and you heard part of this concept in the last meeting as well, but if you have a single digital ID that's actually in your control, on your mobile device, and your identification is there, you don't have to leave your footprint all over the place where it's not necessary. My favorite color has nothing to do with my banking requirements. My bank doesn't really need to know that. And in many cases, other ID information that you have has nothing to do with the service that you're receiving. The concept is being able to do things such as doing business internationally, which we do more and more so, being able to sign documents, travel around the world, and being able to do that very smoothly and not wait in long lines. Being able to do commerce, both digital as well as physical, or access many of the services online that matter to you, and you want to be able to get quick access to those, but reliable, consistent access to those, and keep other people out of it. So a lot of that would be done through having your identity with you, that you could actually use that to prove who you are. I'm going to talk about a different concept. This was actually touched upon in the last session as well, but it's a concept that exists in our physical world, and that's the concept of Web of Trust. And Web of Trust is ultimately, if you think of it, each time you fly, each airline has your information, your passport information. They have a credit card on you. They know something financial because they have to pay for the ticket. They know where you're going to. They may even know how often you go if you use the same airline. They may have your points. They can vouch for who you are and your identity. When you bank, there are rules around KYC, know your customer laws. So they actually need to know who you are and do some checking on you to say you are indeed the person you are. But even more so, my bank can probably tell more about me than most other entities, because I've had the same bank. I bank with Bank of America. My payroll has been going in there automatically. They know over the past 20 years, every company that I work for, they know how much I get paid. They know whether I pay my mortgage or not. They know how consistent I have been over the past 20 years. If they say I am Armin, chances are, you know what, you could bank on that because I am Armin. So that form of identity proofing could be valuable for other activities that I do. The countries that we live in, because you pay taxes, you've got driver's licenses, passports, and so on, or even countries you travel to or do business in. Each one of those knows something about who you are, and they could vouch for who you are again. And then there's the friends and family, your landlord, your employer, other people that you have interacted with over the years, and they could vouch for who you are. And in fact, when you think about a Web of Trust, in some cases, the connection that you have with some of these entities is strong enough where only one connection alone could take you from a transparent individual into a verified person. Now, the more those connections that you have, the more you can actually have faith and trust in who the person is. This is the way we live the physical world. This is how people know about other people, and they actually interact with them. But in the online world, we don't have as much of the concept. Social networking and creating connections through that comes closer to it, but it doesn't have the strong signals such as airlines, or signals such as your banking information or government information that can give you that reliably. Now, here's what we do with ShoCard, and I'm going to give you just a high-level view of how the system works and what the user experience is. A user will go in, grab a government ID, it could be passport, driver's license, whatever that it is. They take a selfie of themselves, and what we do is we scan that data, we put it on your mobile device, and we encrypt it to make sure if your phone is somehow lost, someone can't just go in and easily get the data out of it. But we just keep all that information on your device itself, and it's something that looks like your digital ID, your driver's license, so you know what it is that you actually have. What we do is we grab each individual field within that, and we create a one-way hash, and we digitally sign that on your device using your private key. And we then pass the results of that over to our server that ultimately writes it on the blockchain. Now, in this process, we're not writing anything that's encrypted on the blockchain. If it's encrypted and somehow your private key is compromised, you could go back and reverse engineer it and actually see and read the data. What we do is one-way hashes and signatures that are only used for one purpose and one purpose only is validation of data. You have to present your data, and then we use the blockchain to be able to validate it using your public key. But that's the process of registering yourself on the blockchain. Now, the other question is, why use the blockchain, and what happens when we do that? With what I just described, you have an individual with a record on the blockchain. In and of itself, it's not very meaningful. I can grab Ali's driver's license, I can scan that in, and I could claim to be him. Well, that's a self-certification. I am saying who I am, and obviously a hacker can easily do that. So we'll go through a second concept, and this is where the Web of Trust concept we were talking about before comes into play. So if I were to grab my data, and let's say I go to my bank. I could be an existing customer of a bank, or if I'm a new one, I open up an account, they do KYC check on me. They go through some rigor to be able to identify me, or they have already identified me. So I go through whatever multiple processes they require in order to be able to authenticate me at the bank. And then I present my ID information to them that they can compare to that data and compare that with a record that I have on the blockchain and say the two match. And once they say I'm the owner of that record on the blockchain, and I have the private key that can sign things in challenges when they come about, well, then they can have the confidence that that record belongs to me. So they write a new record on the blockchain using their own private key. And that new record is a certification. That certification basically says, I raise my hand and I say, I know who this individual is. Now, I could take those credentials, go to another bank. I could present that data in a transaction that I'm doing, perhaps from my first bank to the second one, but they need to know who I am before they let me do that transaction. I can present just my data that could be referenced back to the blockchain record entry that I have, and they can see my certification because I share that with them. And they can actually see that the first bank, so long as they trust that first bank, they can then see that they have actually certified me. They've gone through the rigor that they go through to do KYC, to know who I am. There could be other attestation that's actually on that certification that they could say, such as I banked with them for 20 years and I have a particular credit rating. Based on that, they can be assured that I am the individual that I am and let me proceed with whatever transaction I do without having to do the lengthy process of a separate KYC check that they would need to do with me otherwise. So that process can happen at transaction speed and rather quickly. Now, what's important about this, just real quickly in terms of blockchain, and I've got another slide that talks about that, is the blockchain is a shared ledger that any entity can go to and actually look for records and do their validation. Bank 2 does not need to actually talk to Bank 1. There's also no privacy issue because I, as a user, will volunteer my information, the information I want to share with Bank 2. So they don't need to go in and tell Bank 1 that I have permission from the user to actually get access to the following set of data. As a user, I could take that data, I could take it to another entity, I could take it to a government entity, for example, and say, the bank has done the KYC check with me. There are actually some countries we're working with where the governments work with banks to allow you to do things such as log into their IRS equivalent, the revenue service equivalent, or other government services. Well, they can just look at that attestation that's ultimately and certification that's on the blockchain and instantaneously be able to verify who you are as an individual. This isn't verifying your username and password. There are no usernames and passwords we're talking about. This is being able to identify you with the identification you have as an individual, be it your passport number, social security number, driver's license, or whatever it is that you share with the entity that's relevant to them for that transaction. You could take the same data, take it to a merchant, and do the same thing, again, being able to prove who you are. So that's the concept of Web of Trust and how we use the blockchain. In all of these circumstances, you don't have to go back to the originating entity and talk to them, access their database or access their services to somehow say, I have permission to get this information from the user, give me the data back. Now, just real quick, I'm going to touch on the blockchain. There's been different discussions about that. There was also, I think this morning, the CTO of Ping was talking about scale issues with blockchain. All of those are real. But let me first talk about the values of blockchain. And in order to make it work, you have to do a lot of additional work in order to create scale with it. And we've done a lot of that work as well. But here's what's important about blockchain. First of all, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Blockchain is the infrastructure. Bitcoin is one instance of it, and it has to do with virtual currency. We actually write to multiple blockchains. Bitcoin blockchain is one of them. We're doing an implementation with Ethereum, and there are other publicly made smaller blockchains that we write to instantaneously with our records that would make it available in all. But again, I want to distinguish between the technology. What's really important about blockchain is it's a ledger. Ledger means you keep adding at the end of the ledger rather than going in like a regular database and modifying it. But it is a database. It's a database and a data source. The difference between that and traditional databases is that once you write a record and it's been confirmed, you can no longer delete it or modify it. What you could do is you could add additional records that describe a state change with it. But that's really important for us, that the state of those records, and in fact, it cannot be changed. The other thing is that records can only be written by an owner of a private key, of an owner of that record. So when you actually write a record, you know who owns that. It is not some system that writes it on your behalf, and you don't know the ownership of it. And you prove the ownership with your private key whenever you actually access that. What's beautiful about it is that everyone can actually view that database. You don't need permissions. It's a public ledger. Anyone can go in and use that for verification. So there aren't separate security provisions you need to have in place to make that happen. But what's important is then the onus is on you as a service provider who uses the blockchain to make sure things are hashed, things are signed, encrypted, or whatever you need to do to protect the data so you don't actually have hackers going into the blockchain and reading all of user data. What's important is privacy and making sure the user is in control. The way that we use it is we only and exclusively use it for validation purposes. The other thing about the blockchain is that it is inherently a highly distributed database. Now, if you have a private blockchain, you don't take advantage of that. If you use something like Bitcoin, there are thousands and thousands of copies of that everywhere. We, in fact, have a partial copy of the Bitcoin blockchain ourselves. It is as valid as any other version of it that's out there because those records are permanent once they're actually written to it. Any other blockchain could easily be opened up for that replication. Replication of the blockchain is a lot simpler than your traditional databases. Real quickly, and I won't go into that, but there's a hashing algorithm associated with blockchain. You can easily look that up on the web and read about it. But it adds a level of integrity to the records that is virtually impossible to break. And I say virtually because anything can eventually be broken, but it would be incredibly difficult to do. And the machine power you would need to do that would be beyond a lot of what we actually have available today. It's just not efficient, in fact, for a hacker to want to do that. So those databases are far more secure than our traditional databases that are secured by policies of an enterprise saying, I own the data, there will not be any breach. And we've had breaches of data over and over with millions of records being breached. In this way, you don't have to worry about that just because of the security of the records once they're written. What I want to do real quick, and I've got a few minutes to go through this, I want to give you a few use cases so you have a flavor of all these concepts. I talked about a lot of concepts. Our product is real. We're actually working and deploying that with partners that we have. We've really focused on two verticals. One is financial institutions. The other one has to do with air travel. Air travel has to do with giving you an e-passport, a single travel token, letting you skip the long lines and go through self-service kiosks and being able to go from one airline to another airline to another airport to another country, and just cutting down on the wait time. But I'm going to go through some simple cases of this thing. First one, very simple, e-commerce. Again, you could have been certified by any entity in this example that vouches for you as an individual. But you go in, you do a purchase. Let's say you see this shoe. It could be on a web page. It could be on a browser. In fact, this could even be at a POS physical store that you go to and you buy that pair of shoe. But we'll just go through this example. What you do is you present your data, and if you're online, you still provide a lot of your information, such as credit card information, expiration date, and so on, to the merchant. And the merchant does nothing different than what they have before. They don't need to know anything about, do you have a ShoCard capability or not? You press the buy button on the bottom, and then on your phone, you would get a request that comes in and says that you're about to do this purchase. Do you approve it or not? Well, for this transaction, in order to access your private key that signs a challenge and goes back, very similar to what basically FIDO protocol standard specifies. But in order to do that, you use your Touch ID on the device to access it. And if you did the purchase, you say yes. And once you do that, the transaction goes through and it's approved. The merchant didn't have to do anything in terms of modifying anything on the website to enable this. Let's say you're doing something that is of higher value. Let's say you're working with your bank. Simple transaction, $100. Credit card companies already take that fraud into account. They do lose a lot of money on it, but they want to reduce friction. So a Touch ID would be sufficient for that. But let's say you're about to go in and transfer money, $25,000, wire money. Today, I have banks and I have brokerages that I work with. Brokerages know me a little bit more. When I want to wire money, so long as they can call me and talk to me, they feel comfortable enough to let me wire money. Sometimes I could be here, standing here while I'm doing a wire. It's when it's convenient for them to call me. So I can't take it. It goes into voicemail. I got to call them back. If it's my bank actually requires me to walk in, so I actually have to drive to the branch in order to transfer or wire money. So it's a lengthier process, and it is a cost for the financial institution. It's a cost for me as a consumer. But let's say I want to do a high-value transaction, and I had initially set up my ShoCard with my biometrics, facial recognition. Could be other forms of it as well, audio, fingerprint, and so on. But facial recognition, similar to self, is easiest for us to take. During that process, you'll be asked to actually take an image of yourself through a live stream, so we know you didn't just hold up someone's picture to it. And that, along with your signature and the original selfie you had become a package that's actually sent over to the bank for verification and validation that this is you, which means someone didn't just have access to my Touch ID on my phone and is about to transfer $205,000. You could set different levels of authentication that you require based on the transaction. So it's not one for all. Depending on what you're going to do, you could log into a website a whole lot easier with Touch ID. But if you're going to add a payer to that, then you want to, let's say if it's your bank, you may want to ask them for biometrics because you want to make sure money's going to the right place. But the institutions can make the determination on that. Another use case, this is one, as we were working with banks, it has come up many times. And I'm sure you've dealt with call center, what do you call it, verification process and the headaches associated with that. But you call your call center, and what you do today, certainly what I do today, and many of us do, is you provide your name, your social security number, your address, your favorite color, make you your first card, the stuff I talked about before, and some stuff maybe they go out and they find on you. Like, where did you live when you were in high school? Like, what street? And I have failed some of those questions before because I don't remember. That was way too many years ago. But you go through this process just to identify who you are, and the transaction itself could be instantaneous. That's the cost for the institutions, be it your telco, be it your bank, whoever it is. And for you as a consumer, it's a very expensive, time-consuming, and painful process to go through. Instead, I could go in and just simply provide my username, my account number, the telephone number, whatever ID that they have on me. And when I do that, I just say verify, or at the call center, they say verify the caller. When they do that, I get a notification that comes in. It's very clear for me to understand what it is. I don't get a number that I got in an SMS, which could be social engineered. It can be hacked. There are a lot of problems with clear text SMS. But I get a secure message that comes to me that I can look at it and say, yep, indeed, allow the call center to log in as me and look at my data. When they do that, they'll have access to my data instantaneously, and they can proceed to actually help me with what I actually called them about. But the whole verification process can be done rather quickly. The other very simple case is if I want to log into my account, rather than having to go through the username password process, which eventually I believe they're going to go away. I think we've heard a lot of themes about that, but they're not going away today. They're still going to exist for some time to come. But what I could do is take a couple of alternatives. I could enter my username, and I think this pointer works. So rather than pressing login, I could press an alternate button. We just call that ShoCard right now. Or I could scan a QR code or some other code that would be on the page. And by doing that, a secure message gets established between me and the bank. And I get a notification on my phone saying I want to log in. And if I approve that, using my Touch ID or whatever form that the bank would then require me in that example, I can go ahead and proceed and actually access my account. And becomes a lot more frictionless in the process because I don't have to go through entering username, passwords, and so on. I'm sure many of you have gone through the process that I've gone through with my accounts. First, I say, oh, it's great. My PC will, or my Mac, whatever it is, will remember my username, passwords. I don't have to type it in again. Just to go on a different browser or go on a different PC or go on your mobile phone, it's like, what was my password? I want to access my child's account. He goes to high school, and I want to look at his reports and so on. I always have to be on a particular computer because I do not remember the password to save my life. And each time I want to change the password, they give me all these rules about what to remember. And so what I do is I try a few different ones. Sometimes I get locked out. I call center. I go through the process of proving who I am all over again. To get a new password set, I don't want to write it down anywhere because I don't want anybody to read it. 2 months later, I'll go through the same process again. Well, you don't even have to remember what username passwords are. You could log in because all I need to do is prove who I am. And it can be verified independently by going to the blockchain, seeing my identity, being able to match my transaction with the challenge that I get. I sign that with my private key. They can match that and see that that's who I am. And I'm not going through all the crypto and security that happens behind it. But what we do is basically make it virtually impossible, and nothing is ever impossible, virtually impossible for man-in-the-middle attack to listen to any of your communication. I'm going to go through yet another component of this, and this has to do with more than authentication. We've listened to lots of different authentication processes here this week, but this has to do with being able to add user credentials to my identity. My identity is not just my authorization to log in. So we talked about some of this process. You seal your record, you put a record on the blockchain, you share that with an entity, say your bank. They figure out that it's you, and they put a certification on the blockchain. This could be your bank, ultimately, that you do your normal transactions with. Now, what they do is they could give you a credit score. They could give you your monthly statement in a PDF file. So it doesn't even need to be a simple name value field. It could be a document they pass. It could be your balance. But they give you, in this example, they're giving you a credit score, and they say it's a credit score of 95. What they do is they put that on the blockchain. They actually give you a copy of that, so you have the raw data. I'm putting that in clear text just to illustrate it, but it's really a hash signature that goes down there. So you can't reverse engineer and see what the data is. Now, what I could do as a user, I could present my data to a third party. Let's say a loan agent. I'm going to go refinance my home. I'm going to put some money into the house. They may want to check the source of my funds, if I actually had my average balance given to me, or it could be my certification, my credit score. They can easily, I pass my data to them. They can easily go to the blockchain, grab my certifications, see that the bank certified all of that data. If they have, then they know that it's me. They can say, this is me as the individual, all of that matched, and they can validate my credit score. If I lie about my credit score, all they can do is say it's wrong, but they can't go read the real data on it. So that's a summary of what we've done, and in terms of identity and using blockchain as a means of being able to share that across different entities who otherwise would never talk to each other, but being able to share information about a user. Rob, thank you. So we've got time for maybe one or two questions real quick, and certainly afterwards you can find out in myself or Ali to ask more questions. Go ahead.
So we'll just take one question from the back there. Sorry, you sir, yes?
Okay.
I was wondering why the bank would choose to engage with this right into this blockchain. What's in it for the banks?
Different banks have different incentives in that process. Some of the banks that we've made more progress with have actually been a lot of the international banks. But one example is what I talked about in terms of, let's say you want to get a loan. But being able to publish what your account balance is, and you get that today. You get a PDF file that you could download, or your physical statement you get. There's no proofing in that process. So what happens is, if I want to get a loan and I need to prove the source of my funds, I submit that information and a piece of paper that says you're allowed to talk to my bank and verify it. They then have to contact the bank, and there's cost involved with that. They need to see, is this really you? It's a 2 to 3 day process turning that around and being able to verify it. And if you look at where the industry is going, and especially in fintech, being able to get your loans digitally through other sources, non-bank sources, and so on, banks are more and more not only interested, but sometimes even fearful about the future, what's happening, and they want to advance that more because consumers are expecting it. It's to speed up the process. That's one example of it.
Okay, Armin, thank you very much. I think we're out of
Thank you.
time, so thanks very much.
Thank you.